The reversey/Othello angle seems like a very natural fit for Usopp to make his mark on Elbaf. I agree, I think this might be a very decent fit as well. Because Usopp is part of the crew that post-time skip just can't engage in straight up punch fights in the new world. And just like Sanji said all the way back during Enisobi, Usopp needs to do what no one else on the crew can do and contribute with his own unique skill set, and strategic board games seems very much like something within Usopp's comfort zone. Also Robin, she would be a great choice to tackle something like this as well. But I like Usopp because Emu has begun a direct assault on the very spirit of Elbaf, and as we'll talk about later with the kids in this video, this fight is no longer about strength, it is about having belief in the heart of Elbaf. And whilst this may very well be cut because I really want Usopp to have a bigger role in this arc, I still think that there is no one better placed to uphold the spirit of Elbaf than Usopp. Big Daddy Grand Line Man, are you not going to talk about what Emu said about King Harold? How it basically confirms that Harold was a big bad person, and Loki is probably in the right for killing him? You see, that's interesting because I actually got the opposite impression, that Harold's blunder refers to a decision that may have been deliberately made against Emu. Although I have to say I think my mind is a bit poisoned here because of Emu's use of the word blunder, as that is how he describes the poneglyphs being scattered throughout the world by Nefertari Lily. It was Lily's blunder. Thanks to her blunder that day, all of the things are happening today. And I don't see Lily as having been a big bad person, even though she may have outwardly portrayed herself as an ally of Emu. And this whole blunder thing could refer to something like Harold breaking free of Emu's mind control, even briefly, or someone else breaking him out of that control. And then let's say in that brief moment, Harold pleads with Loki to kill him. Because if not, then Emu is going to keep control of Harold and Elbaf will fall. And as I've said before, I do hope it's not something that blanket good and evil can explain, like, oh, Harold was bad because he got controlled by bad man. And I do hope that Harold has a more interesting reason to have been working with the world government as we suspect. But you know, in this chapter, we also had Haradin and Loki arguing about Harold's death, and Loki does say something along the lines of, hey brother, he was my father as well, which says to me that killing Harold was probably quite a difficult thing for Loki to do, because he still values that father-son connection. One big point against the Jarl Ismosa theory is that Gerd and Goldberg didn't recognize the voice from the snail. You'd think they would recognize the voice of one of Elbaf's greatest legends. I mean, I could also say the same thing about Loki. You would think that Loki would recognize Jarl's voice. But this is another thing that I saw just a little bit differently. When Mossa calls, yes, we do get reaction shots of both Gerd and Goldberg, and they're quite subdued and contemplative. It's really hard to know what to make of these shots because there is no surprise whatsoever, and that almost makes this whole situation even more suspicious. You'd think that at least one of them would have had a stronger reaction to some dude calling Loki in the underworld, whether it's Jarl or not. But the way they're looking at Loki on the snail phone, it's almost as if they both know exactly what's going on and they are choosing to play dumb. Which is the sort of thing I could see happening in the One Piece, that these two have discovered Jarl's secret conversations at some stage and potentially even overheard the truth of the Harold situation, but have kept it to themselves because of something Haradin pride and honor. I don't know, a lot just seems to be lining up for it to be Jarl at the moment, but I also concede there is quite a bit that doesn't necessarily add up, including the fact that yes, in chapter 1134, Loki does state that he has never met Mossa, which, well, that just wouldn't be true if it was Jarl. And the only way for this to work would be if Loki doesn't know that he's speaking to Jarl, and Jarl has been secretly keeping him company because he feels bad about what happened, or whatever reason of convenience it is that Oda comes up with. But we should definitely explore other options as well, because there are too many factors here that are pointing towards a non-Jarl answer. So with that, the answer could also be that Loki is talking to someone significantly further away. And one location that we do know is having a pretty rough time right now is the Holy Land of Marijois, which might make sense with how Loki refers to Mossa. This doesn't get translated into English at all, but Loki uses a special honorific with Mossa, which is Ko, so he calls him Mossako. Ko being a very old term of respect for nobilities or high-ranking military personnel, which is one reason why it would work well for Jarl, because there wouldn't be anyone more worthy of that honorific on Elbaf than him. But unless Loki was using it sarcastically, whoever he's talking to would be a pretty big deal. And if we are talking talking about the Holy Lands, then Loki's friend could even be a world noble. Maybe someone who is infected with the Don Quixote Moscard way of thinking and is now actively working against their fellow world nobles. But as for why such a person would or even could have reached out to Loki, I have no idea, which is why I still kind of default to Jarl. But I will take some time to mention other ideas though. One of my favorites is that Mossa is actually the owl in the library. There's definitely something set up with that bad winged boy. And it's also been suggested that it could be Morley speaking to Loki, and this is primarily because Morley's epithet is Morley of fur, and while the beard isn't anywhere near as Mossa as Jarl's, it is still pretty Mossa, so the codename could work. There would also be something nice about a giant from another kingdom reaching out to Elbaf for whatever reason, and Morley calling now would be because there's something happening with the Revolutionary Army, like pillaging a certain Holy Land. Got my hands full here, Loki, can't chat. And the Revolutionary Army did have a mission to Marijois during the Reverie, and maybe that's why Loki said that, quote, "If I were there in your place, I'd have razed it to the ground and killed them all instead." And Loki also went on to say, "And that's why you're so weak, Shaggy. Listen, you don't want to let those fools get away. You gotta put them down for good or they'll come back for vengeance." I guess referring to not wiping out all of the world nobles while they had the chance maybe? Or Mossa could even be a much more unexpected person. I like the theory that Mossa may be Shirahoshi, based off Roger telling Neptune that his daughter would be, quote, Shaggy. She could possibly have been confiding in another member of royalty about her pressures as a princess while keeping her identity hidden for safety. Blackbeard could very well be invading Fishman Island as we speak. He certainly could be, and Roger certainly did say that, didn't he? This was when Neptune found out that he was going to be a father before he even had a wife, and Roger reassured Neptune that he wouldn't be back in the future to, quote, kidnap your hairy daughter. And look, I don't hate this idea. Shirahoshi and Loki would have quite a bit in common, what with both of them being royalty and both of them having been locked up for big parts of their life. And Mossa does often speak about being scared and trembling and all that, and that is very Shirahoshi language. And the co-honorific would also make sense to use for Shirahoshi, of course, but I do think that the name Mossa is a bit of a stretch for Shirahoshi, and the Dendenmushi appearance still gets me. These psychic snails take on the physical qualities of those who speak through them, and the last time we saw her, Shirahoshi did not have the world's most Mossa of beards. But then you can also make the argument that this beard is a special feature of this specific kind of Dendenmushi, because they are identified as cold-resistant types. So the thick beard might not represent the speaker in this case, it might represent the equipment, the snail itself. So in conclusion, Mossa could be anyone, and we've gotten nowhere. It only occurs to me now that Road's role-playing castle at the start of Elbaf now feels like a slight microcosm of what's happening now. Road enslaved a bunch of humans to serve as pieces in his game, which we're seeing Emu do in a much more severe manner. Yeah, that's very right. The Legoland opening does have quite a bit in common with what we're seeing right now. Road, of course, cosplayed as his sun god OC in a black robe, looking all demonic, and now we have a very horrifying Emu claiming dominion over the island and playing with its citizens like toys, just like how Road toyed with all the humans he'd abducted and trapped in his diorama. And come to think of it, whatever happened to all those people? Did they ever get free? There were a lot of people that Road kept kidnapped in there. He called them live dolls, which is so insanely creepy and a great reminder that Road is such a disturbing weirdo who's been rehabilitated into a comic relief character. From what I remember, Luffy punched a hole in the wall and all of the other live dolls said that they would use this chance to escape while they can. Escape to where though? Castle was in the underworld. Good luck, miscellaneous humans. But also all of Road's pets, these gigantic nightmare creatures, are now appearing in a much more horrifying form through Killingham's devil fruit abilities, and I guess if we continue down this line of similarities, then Emu will eventually become a big old giant just like Road, and then Emu's also going to end up being punished by his equivalent of Gerd for being very weird and a little bit mean. Harridan says they're going to use the lift to get off the Sun World. You omitted that detail and spoke of Loki's devil fruit as a possible solution instead. So what Harridan says in the chapter that we've all read is that we need to get a lift up to the Sun Realm, which I initially read as very colloquial English, like, could you give me a lift somewhere? Mate, I need a lift. Stuff like that. But at the very least, looking at the early spoilers does seem to clarify this a bit by having Harridan saying, everyone get on the lift. But TLDR, it looks like they do have a way up, so we can safely continue to ignore the potential of Loki's devil fruit, and you know what? We're just going to use the lift to fight Emu. Emu's Emu's power makes everything before make no sense. If he can turn his enemies into slaves, why didn't he use it on every enemy? So that's definitely a question that's going to have to be answered at some point. And that is the danger of introducing such an extreme power like this. At the moment, there's no reason why you don't just use it on the entire planet. Especially because St. Summers and St. Killingham confirm that they actually know this game and can even see the board. Killingham says that it's pretty much already completely covered in their color, so it's not even a one-time use power. Emu has done this before, and that is curious in and of itself. Here I was thinking that this was the first time in potentially centuries that Emu has had to set foot on the surface, but we have two, I guess relatively new, Holy Knights who are familiar with this game, so where else has it been played? And when was that where else? But Oda does have a fair bit of explaining to do. At the very least, we need a reason why, say 30 to 40 years ago, Emu didn't just snap it down for 5 minutes and Domi Reversi Roger, which would have saved him a lot of trouble in the long run, or Rocks, or even Luffy once he started to become a bit of a pain. Or Kaido, or Big Mom, or Whitebeard, all of these colossal problems that the world government has failed to deal with. So there does need to be a limitation to this power somewhere, or a very good personality-based excuse why Emu doesn't just want to enslave everyone. Seeing Urishima's brother shows how into world building Oda is, and boy, was it unnecessary. So I thought that was a very fun touch. And I say that as a pretty big not fan of Urishima. This week in Yamato's cover story, we have a sumo tournament where Yamato defeats Urishima's older brother. And look, if you don't remember Urishima, he's the guy we met right at the beginning of Wano who wanted to marry Kiku. And it's also implied that he ate the household pet of an elderly couple. Great guy. So not only is Yamato doing the Kozuki Oden pilgrimage, but we're also starting to walk the path of Luffy as well. And Kawamatsu is on the cover watching the match in the audience, and I hope that this isn't all that we see of him. He is my favorite vassal after Raizo, and so I am always keen for more Kawamatsu. The horn Killingham toots is most likely meant to be the Gjallarhorn, the blowing of which signifies the beginning of Ragnarok, or thematically it's the Gjallarhorn anyway. So honestly, the first thing that I thought of when I saw this was the Horn of Gondor. But that's just because I have so much Lord of the Rings based brain rot. Thematically, I definitely agree though, as this horn is the item that is currently causing the closest possible thing to an apocalypse that we have seen in the One Piece world, as it just keeps summoning and reviving infinite nightmare demons. However, that does add a potential point of compromise, because if Killingham does need the horn to revive these creatures, then we just need to take that horn off him and we have completely changed the game. And as for its inspiration, I should say that as with all good Norse craft work, it's also been theorized by Norse scholars that the Gjallarhorn, in addition to heralding the end times, also served as a drinking vessel. The sharp teeth and thick eyelashes on St. Killingham are features that appear on Charlotte Galette and Charlotte Poix from the Big Mom Pirates, so he is probably from their race. So Charlotte Galette and Charlotte Poix are twin sisters. The one that casual readers and watchers will be more familiar with is Galette. She had the funky butterfruit, and she does have those rather luxurious St. Killingham eyelashes. However, her teeth are completely normal. But when we look at her twin sister Poix, seen here speaking to a frogman, which I don't think has ever been addressed, I guess he's some sort of frogzoan, or a homie, maybe a homie. But Poix does have spiky teeth, however, she lacks the eyebrows. So both of them do have parts of Killingham. However, something weirder about Charlotte Galette in particular is that she has what could very well be devil horns, and somehow she's not even the most demonic of the Charlotte siblings. That would be 24th son Charlotte Dacroix, who flat out has demon wings, but these could also be devil fruit related, like how Stussy's bat fruit gives her very similar looking wings, whilst retaining all other aspects of humanity. I don't want to be a downer, then don't, but you're gonna do it anyway, aren't you? But at this point, I think it's entirely possible that our heroes fail, Emu gets what they want out of Elbaf, and the Straw Hats are forced to retreat with what little they can salvage. Likely Harudin and his crew, and injured Loki and Gaban, Bonnie Lilith, and maybe Ripley and or Colin. Alright, so I'm in two very different minds about this. Part of me does think that Emu shouldn't be defeated here, even if it's not actual Emu, but a fraction of the power being channeled through Gunko, because any defeat is ultimately going to diminish the threat of Emu going forward. Like when Kang the Conqueror was introduced and also beaten in Ant-Man. It just feels like a bad idea to have such an overwhelming presence, someone who we are relying on to be our main major antagonist beaten in their debut appearance. kids. And then there's also the giants. The giants of Elbaf have been flagged as one of the deciding factors of the incoming war, a pretty major deciding factor. So if we do save them here and they all align with Luffy, then we are going into that war in a very unexciting way in terms of drama, because we know that we already have the deciding factor on our side. Whereas if Emu did successfully keep all of the giants converted, then we would be doing the classic One Piece thing of going into a situation as the distinct underdogs, having to overcome great adversity and stuff like that. Emu keeping the giants would be a great way to achieve that darkest before dawn kind of feeling, as there will need to come a time in the future where it feels like all is lost before all is won, and this could be a step towards that. However, my One Piece intuition is relentlessly nagging me and reminding me to think of the children on Elbaf, and how the story is more about them and building hope for the future than it is to create despair for the final conflict. In this chapter, we even see how the nightmare creatures are made. We see all of the children dreaming about devils, and then devils spawn from the nightmare fisher. And I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that the fate of Elbaf hinges almost entirely on these kids. We now know that their thoughts can be manipulated even while they're unconscious, and I find it very, very difficult to see Oda passing up the opportunity to flip this dynamic and have the kids start to dream about warriors of hope to come and save them after being influenced by the arrival of Luffy, Loki, and of course, Bent's mum. Maybe even Colin manages to conjure a dream version of Scopogaban. To me, that feels like Oda's focus and direction. That we've got to go out and win the hearts and minds of the next generation, and it's their will and their desires that are going to safeguard and shape the future. Which would be a complete defeat for Emu without necessarily physically punching him up. Emu's goal, as stated in this chapter, is to shatter the spirit of Elbaf, and he thinks he's doing that by corrupting the adults and removing the older generation. Because Emu and the Holy Knights only see value in raw strength. The adults can fight, the kids can't. Therefore, the adults have the spirit and the kids have the not that. But the hubris here is that through St. Killiam, Emu has actually given the younger generation the exact tools they need to win this fight. Because as long as they believe hard enough in salvation and in the spirit of their culture, that will manifest into reality, and all of the nightmare creatures are going to be reversied into dream creatures. That is where I think we're heading, but you let me know how you think this is all going to play out in the comments below.